Okay, good morning, everybody. Fergus Dolan is my name. I work with NALA, National Adult Literacy Agency. We're delighted to have you here this morning for our webinar on online learning and the human connection. And our facilitator this morning is Nick Jones. Nick is an ESOL tutor with Galway and Roscommon ETB. So over to you, Nick.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks very much for turning up. This is my first NALA webinar. And what I'd really like to do today is have something very participatory. So I'm going to do a presentation. It's a lot about asking questions so that I can hear answers as well. So we can kind of share learning. It's nearly the anniversary of the first lockdown. So I think for me, this was very much about taking stock of where we are at the moment with our teaching and listening to each other. What are we doing and how are we doing it? So I'm going to ask you some questions, but first try to be a little bit provocative so we get lots of reaction. Okay, so let's zoom into, just while we're here, I work with Gort Adult Learning Centre. I'm an ESOL tutor and I work mainly with A1 and A2 levels. So there's kind of two things going on there. Mainly Brazilians in Gort. The A1 level would be almost all Brazilians. When you go up to A2 level, you suddenly find that there's a much better mix of nationalities there. So it's kind of interesting to see that where there's a big community of one language, people are much slower advancing. I don't think that's by accident. So anyway, we'll go to the presentation. Okay. So it's online learning and the human connection. What's all that about? As I said, for anybody who's just joining us, it's about taking stock of the moment we're in right now. So 1 year after we started. I think we've all kind of learned how to do remote learning at this stage. The students have learned an awful lot, so have we. And people are feeling a bit more comfortable about the whole thing. But there has been that process, which I'll talk about, the process of trying to get here. And has that kind of, I wonder, have we taken our eye off the ball in some respects? So let's go. Okay, so all the tools, techniques, and technology in the world are nothing without the head, heart, and hands to use them wisely, kindly, and mindfully. Okay, so we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about using Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google or whatever you're on. We're doing all sorts of other stuff. I use a lot of Kahoot, that kind of thing. Different apps to help us, but there's still a teacher-student relationship. And that really needs to be at the core of what we're doing. So I think I'm going to ask a lot of questions that we've all had to answer before. So I think the reason I'm doing that is because I think we've spent a year learning about technology. And the questions I ask are maybe beyond the technology. Okay, so we'll keep moving along. Okay, this is kind of the plan for the presentation, where we're going to go. It's about using the tools and going beyond the tools, as I said. So I'm going to move quite swiftly through the first few points. Have a quick look at how we've made the change over the past year from sitting in a classroom. And I'm a language teacher, so I'm working with students typically in a kind of horseshoe shape. So everybody's kind of quite close together. We're all looking at each other. Oh, sorry, past tense. I was working that way. And I've had to change now to using Zoom and sending the students lots of things to do, lots of apps to engage with. Talk a little bit about the tools that we use. So that's going to be a kind of a personal thing. So what tools I'm using, how the tools are working. Okay, and then points 4 and 5, I think are the real meat of our webinar today. So basing the learning on the students' real lives. Yeah, are we getting stuck too much with the technology? Or are we using technology seamlessly so that we really connect again? So that's kind of what we were supposed to be doing all those years ago, connecting with the students, finding out where they're at and starting our teaching and their learning where they're at, who they are, what their lives are about. I think that's really kind of why ESOL ties into literacy practice. So anybody who isn't an ESOL teacher, I think you're in some way connected with literacy, numeracy. I think we're really all kind of coming from the same place. Who is the student? Okay, and then as Fergus said, we'll go into breakout rooms, and I'll give you further instructions about that just before we do. Okay, so that's kind of the program. Okay, so in terms of reflection, we've made the change, as I say. We had our first lockdown back in March. I think it started on the 16th. And then we were out of the classroom all through kind of the rest of the school year. So for me, that was kind of a wake up in a way, and I think it was for everybody. I had been a TEL champion, the technology enhanced learning. So I'd learned a lot of skills myself, tried to engage with the students. So I did a lot of trying to getting the students to work on Padlet with me. We'd done things like Kahoot in the classroom, but the students weren't really engaging. And most of my students, they have a very low level of English, and it seems to coincide with the low level of interest in technology or capacity. And that's changed. Okay. We then had 3 months in the classroom, but it was different. Everybody was wearing a mask, and there was 2 meters between everybody. So I found a lot of the games that I like to play just went out the window. So I was quite sad about that. Lockdown again in January, and that was a very different experience. I think talking to my colleagues in Galway and Roscommon, everybody seemed to have the same experience. The students had kind of got with it a bit, and they realized you need to know how to use Zoom. You need to figure out apps, that kind of thing. So in some ways it became a lot easier. And I imagine that's been the same for most of us. The majority of our students are now connecting, but there's still significant minorities who don't have good internet connections or who are still a bit freaked out, and particularly the older people. Okay, so what's been my toolbox so far? In the early days, I ended up relying a lot on PUST. And I was a little bit ashamed of that at first, and I realized, hey, that's where my students are at. You know, they want on PUST. The thing that works for them is getting a letter in the post, sending it back to me, and with the next letter, they get their corrections or their comments, and they're used to that technology, and it's comforting for them. So we still use that. And in fact, a lot of my colleagues have taken it on as well. So using on PUST is fine. It gives the students a paper copy. I don't have to pay for the stamps, so that's not my problem. Obviously, we back that up with email, with sending people links to different apps, to all sorts of different activities. But the on PUST is useful. I think it's still there. Okay. I kind of had to figure out hardware as well. The laptop I'm using at the moment has a very poor camera. So I had to figure out how to connect up the webcam to use my phone as a webcam. My phone has a much better camera. So I have a webcam app on the phone, which is what you're seeing me through at the moment. And in terms of apps, I'm mainly just using Kahoot, Quizlet, a little bit of Mentimeter. It helps me for monitoring and evaluation. So I imagine there's nothing spectacularly new for anybody there. It's just kind of touching base. I think we're probably using similar kind of stuff. Okay. As I said, it's really important for me to monitor how everything is going. I can do that informally or formally. So we're chatting a lot on the Zoom sessions. How is it? How are you? How's your internet connection? Formally, I also do that kind of through WhatsApp and texting, and also by sending out little questionnaires, particularly for students who seem to be dropping out. So, and that's kind of worked quite recently. I noticed the numbers had dropped a little bit. So I sent out a kind of a survey, which asked 4 questions. Have you dropped out of class because of your internet connection? Because you don't have time? Because you don't like remote learning, or for some other reason? And lots of students came back and said, I haven't dropped out of class. It's just that, etc. And then you find out lots of things that maybe you hadn't thought about. Okay. And then obviously evaluating is the kind of the sort of extra formal, more occasional kind of thing, where I'm really trying to find out how far we've traveled. And I base that around a personal learning plan, which I get my students to draw up. Okay, so far I think we're kind of all on the same sheet, I imagine. Let's go into kind of the more questioning part of the webinar. How do we visualize remote learning? Okay, so there's a picture here. It's very kind of glossy, shiny, chromy kind of. We have this amazing escalator. Is this what our new tools look like? Is it all shiny, kind of all singing, all dancing? You step on the escalator and it magically transports you up to the next level. Personally, I just can't see my teaching in that way. I can't see my learners stepping onto some kind of magic escalator. I think it's much more like the staircase on the right. It might look shiny, but you still have to do the work. It's still that sweaty human experience of climbing the stairs. Okay. And the final question, obviously, is who's missing from this picture? Like the student, clearly. The student is all important. So we need to be constantly thinking about the student, constantly talking to the student about their experience. And I suppose basing our teaching and our learning on that very human quality. So, I mean, all or most of us trained up on either literacy or ESOL or numeracy. And I think that was day 1. Okay. So I think today is an opportunity to go back to day 1 and think about the questions that we considered then. What's that human interaction? How do we get at it? How do we make the most of it? Okay, so as I said, the student is missing from this picture. We need to just make sure that we're not focusing too much on tools. Okay, I want to start getting a bit provocative about this. Dogme 95 Cinema was a kind of mostly Danish cinema movement, where they kind of drew up a vow of chastity and a list of 10 beliefs about cinema that they were going to follow. So number 1 was that they would do shooting on location. There'd be no props or sets that don't logically exist within the setting. So if you think about it, here I am, and here we all are, sitting in front of one camera, in front of what's our background? Most of us don't worry about the kind of putting in some kind of artificial fancy background. Most of us don't even really bother about sitting in front of our bookshelves, particularly for the students. They just sit in front of an old wall. Okay, and there might be little things in the wall. Yeah, there might be, here you can see there's kind of a picture over my shoulder. There's a door, seems to be a hatch. Maybe that goes up into the attic. Okay, so this is where we are. We're sitting in our houses. So the dogme kind of idea, well, basically was provocative, and everybody seemed to abandon the approach after about 10 years. It did a lot for cinema in terms of making people think about, you know, what's real. We can get too carried away with technology or simply focusing on the technology without thinking about the story. So Dogme 95 really focused on traditional storytelling, traditional performance. And particularly for language teaching, we think a lot about performance. It's a bit different to cinema, but it's still about how do we tell our story and how do we improve that? How do we make our story better? Yeah, how can we put those points across? And that for me is kind of the touchstone for language teaching and literacy is, can the student interact with me? Can the student tell me their story? Okay, so yeah, we need to use all these tools, but we need never to forget that it's the student's story that counts. Okay, I have to admit that the idea of Dogme 95 and its use for English language teaching is not my idea. It comes from a guy called Scott Thornbury, who is a fairly major writer in the whole field of English language teaching. Just to pass on. Okay, so just to read a quick quote, teaching like talk should center on the local and relevant concerns of the people in the room, not on the remote world of coursebook characters, nor the contrived world of grammatical structures. Okay, we're starting with the student. And starting with the student means that we start out with trying to engage with the student and get the student to tell us things and to communicate in their way. Okay, so, and everything has to be around where I am, in my room, where the student is as well. So that's kind of very different if you're sitting in a classroom or if you're on camera in Zoom. So I think they're kind of worthwhile things that we could be reflecting about. Okay, it's not just for ESOL. So just a few things there. Okay, as I said, literacy, any kind of literacy, teaching and learning is about who the students are, where we are in the here and now, the relationship between the students and the teacher. And again, kind of a long one, improving the student's ability to perform communicative tasks that are relevant to their own lives. Okay, that's quite an old idea in ELT, English language teaching. The kind of very early communicative teaching kind of threw grammar out the window completely, or even vocabulary. So if I understand you, that's fine, no problem. But quite quickly, people found, and there was this big criticism of, yeah, but the students don't really move on. Particularly for ESOL, where our students live in Ireland, a lot of their lives are lived through English. They have some communication strategies already. So the focus on accuracy of form is really important. So we start with where the student's communication is at, but we try to help them to move on and to make that better. So that's performance, improving the performance. So it's kind of going back to dogme. Okay, and that's very much what you do with literacy teaching as well, which is what I did before I came into ESOL. You sit down and talk to the students about their lives and the kind of language that they typically encounter or would like to encounter. So what sort of newspaper would they like to read? Yeah, maybe they have an interest in sports, so we try to read like articles on sport, that kind of thing. So I don't come along with my own agenda. Okay, so Scott Thornbury brought up this idea of dog meat English language teaching. Okay, so he said teaching should be done using only the resources that the teachers and students bring to the classroom themselves and whatever happens to be in the classroom. Okay, so I think what happens to be in the classroom today and in my ESOL classes is what's behind me. So as I said before, there's a hatch, there's a door, there seems to be some kind of wardrobe. This is the kind of space that I control. It's marvelous. I can set my boundaries. But at the same time, everybody's aware that I'm sitting in a room in my house. I'm very conscious of that. I can pick up my glass of water. I can nip out to the toilet. There's a kitchen 2 doors away. The student is in a similar setting. We're all in a house, some kind of a house, maybe different. Yeah. So we focus on this real situation. Yeah. In the classroom, that's very different. We're all in a kind of the same classroom. The classroom has a whiteboard, it has some desks, maybe has some windows and doors, not very much else. So in terms of reality, in terms of a real environment, it's quite poor. Where we are now seems to be richer. I think that we can exploit it in ways that we can't exploit a classroom. Okay, so to move along from that. Okay, this is kind of a piece of writing I did for the people who don't make it today, who are going to get obviously the PowerPoint slides. So I'm just going to turn this off and go to full screen. I can find my mouse here. Just for a second. And let's talk more about who we are and where we're sitting. So for teaching English, I can talk about my kitchen. I can talk about my living room. I can ask the students, what's in your living room? Oh, there is a sofa. There is a TV. There are 2 chairs. It's fantastic, actually, because Brazilians really dislike this construction of there is and there are. Because in their language, you just say have sofa, have 2 chairs. But now that we're on Zoom and everything's much more immediate, it just seems to be working much better. They're all saying there is a sofa, there is a TV. And I don't think that's coincidental. I think it's because it's more real. When I'm in the classroom, I ask them, what's in your living room? Their living room could be 100 miles away. But it's not anymore. It's next door. Yeah. So, and there's other stuff. Obviously, there's the stuff behind me, but I can't fill up this square with everything I need. However, lots of things are just at arm's length. Yeah, we can do a lot more. I can pick up, for example, I can pick up my yoga mat. I can say, every morning I do yoga. I practice yoga. It's the present simple. I can talk about my hobbies. Well, I play the mandolin, or I'm learning to play the mandolin. And these things are natural because I'm sitting in my bedroom where I naturally have these things. So, you know, there's a lot going on in our homes that come into language teaching and that appear realistically, or that I can just go and fetch. Okay. Only yesterday, we were trying to kind of focus on the difference between OU and OA. So I had 2 words. I had out, as in please get out, or I don't say this to my students. But then a minimal pair, which is like a really similar word, is obviously oat. Sorry, teacher, I don't understand oat. Oh, just a second, went off to get the porridge. Here you go, oats. Okay, fine. So we have all of this stuff in our homes. We can make use of it. Okay, let's come back a little bit, back into. Okay, you can read this later if you get the PowerPoint on the email. Sorry, I want to go. Okay, this is another little game I found you could play with Zoom, which was to turn the student's video off. Okay, so particularly, I notice in the classroom, the students don't pay much attention to each other. They often forget each other's names. And I'm always trying to get them to connect to each other, to try to remember the new student's name. Okay, so we're kind of learning about clothes at the moment. So I can turn somebody's video off. The rest of the students, can you remember what Sarah is wearing? Oh yeah, she's wearing, or I think she's wearing, an orange jumper. Yeah. Can anybody remember what Fergus is wearing? Yes, he's wearing an orange jumper. Okay, so we have all these little tricks as well. This is another one we did. Can I use your bathroom? So maybe Mario, we're all in your living room. Imagine this. Sorry, can I use your bathroom? Can I use your toilet? Give some instructions. Okay, make it fun and playful. Yeah, this is a real situation. If you have all these students in your living room, one of them will want to use the bathroom. Okay, so just reflect on this. This really doesn't work in a classroom. Unless you have a new student who comes in and suddenly wants to use the bathroom. Most people in the classroom already know where the toilet is. And the toilet also is the same for everybody. So the instructions are going to be the same for everybody. So drilling in this kind of way, this sort of natural way, it's not natural in the classroom. Okay, and I think we can explore this kind of thing a bit more as well. So think more about what's in the student's home. What might there be? It's going to be different for everybody. So these kind of simple instructions like the second door on the right is going to be the first door on the left for the next person. Okay, so we can create these very real situations just by where we are at the moment. Okay. Telephone conversations are really hard for English language learners because we don't normally encounter that kind of stuff. You come to the classroom, you sit there face to face with the teacher, and okay, we could simulate it. I can say, pretend you can't see me, pretend, take out your telephone and pretend you're, it's too much. But when you're on Zoom, you can just turn off the image, turn off two students' videos. Now they're on a telephone call. Okay, so it takes away the fear. Actually, telephone calls are not terribly difficult, but there's a lot of fear because we're unaccustomed to doing it. Okay, so people are becoming much more relaxed about that kind of thing. I think it's really welcome. Okay, so just to keep going through. So Realia is a real kind of English language teaching word. That means when you cart lots of junk in from your house into the classroom, typically, for example, you might use, you bring in a carton of milk, a packet of biscuits, maybe a bottle of water. And so you can practice all these words like bottle of, carton of, you might go for a kilo of sugar. Okay, and it's kind of good. It's a little bit real. It's also a little bit far-fetched in a classroom because everybody knows that, you know, you brought this in from your house. Most classrooms, you don't have a kilo of sugar sitting there. Okay, so it's a lot more real when you're sitting in your house. Hey, I just got a kilo of sugar from my kitchen. This is a kilo of sugar. So trying to keep everything more real is easier on Zoom in some ways. You know, there are lots of things that you can't realistically bring into either room. But I could, for example, show you my garden, which is, I'll just turn around, you can see the garden kind of out there. That's real. I don't have to show people pictures. Okay, so what I'm trying to do with my language teaching is to start talking to the students about our lives, see how they communicate, and then maybe I'll come along and add in more things, add in little bits from a course book or maybe a grammar book, or put in, okay, well, maybe we could use Quizlet here to kind of back up our vocabulary or something like that. But I want to start out from where we're sitting as much as possible. I want to talk to the students about their lives. So using Zoom creatively, I think, can really help with that. And you know, that's kind of where we're going to go on from. So that's kind of pretty much wrapping up. Oh yeah, I had this little last one. Lockdown has kind of made our students' lives a little bit kind of dull and repetitive. I think my life is pretty samey. I do the same stuff every day. I go for lovely walks, but I go for a lovely walk in the same place every day. So what I found with some of the classes is I tell them, just tell me a lie about what you did yesterday. Right? Okay, I realized yesterday you just got up and you made sure the kids brushed their teeth. And after a while, we've done all that vocab. Tell me about your trip to Venice. Did you go on a gondola? And all this kind of stuff. And in a way, I think telling lies is also a way of talking about our real life. When you say something is a lie, it's about what you don't have, maybe what you wish you had. And so we can kind of practice all sorts of simple stuff like maybe the past simple. And we're still talking about who we are in terms of the things we yearn for. And the things that we yearn for are important in lockdown. We still need to talk about them. Okay, so that's kind of the end of me. As I said, I really wanted to do this webinar so that I could listen to other people and see, are they finding the same things? Are they trying to figure out what's happening in the student's life? Which I'm sure you are. So maybe we'll just kill the PowerPoint there. Get rid of these breakout rooms. So if we had room 1, obviously that would be a good place to start. So what we thought was maybe if you could feedback kind of just one point from the 2 questions that you kind of really engaged with. If we get time, we'll go back around and do a second round of all the groups. So Fergus, we had 6 groups, did we? Yeah, so we can go around then. So maybe whoever the rapporteur for group 1 was, if we could just let us know how you got on. Just focus on one point there. We will try and pick different points from each group. So come in, group 1.
Yeah, I can talk for group 1.
I would just, Sharon just mentioned the Padlet. We took some notes on the Padlet, so there's kind of detailed notes there, but I didn't get to say anything because I was typing on the Padlet, but I agree with what the group said anyway, you know. Right. Sharon, if you want to do it.
Yeah, I don't mind. Just with regard to mourning the classroom setting, the general feeling was around the loss of, because we weren't in a physical setting together, that it was more difficult to read body language and pick up on body language cues. So, you know, and for practical subjects, so for example, I would take some, you know, computer lessons or whatever. So I might show them something, I could demonstrate it on the screen, but I can't watch them try it out because they can't do it physically in front of me. So sometimes I think I've explained it, I think they understand it, and then maybe they send the exercise back to me and I realize some parts were, you know, obviously misunderstood or whatever. Just having the physical connection there. And also on Zoom and Teams, it can be difficult to know when to speak, like what just happened there. I'm going, is Caroline going to talk? Am I going to talk? Which of us is going to talk? So then none of us talks, and then there's that awkward silence. So there can be a bit of that as well, because you're not quite sure when to come in. And, you know, I suppose the longer we do it, the more comfortable, I find the students are a little more comfortable with it now. But, you know, that's something I mourn from physically being in the classroom.
Okay, that's great. So it kind of, that'd be something that wouldn't occur to me because I'm not trying to explain IT so much to people. But yeah, and I found it was a lot easier to explain Zoom to people when we were back in the classroom. So yeah.
Nick, could I just add a point, please, to what Sharon said? Sharon, yesterday Geraldine Rafferty, who's a colleague of Nick's, she's with the Roscommon Galway ETB, she's based in Roscommon, did a webinar on Google Classroom. And it's tricky enough to get going on Google Classroom, and you do a lot of work individually with each student to get them comfortable and logged in, because each student has a different name and login. So they might be, say, Sharon 21 at Gort FET, and then a different login. But once she showed that once you're up and running, you can see individually the students working, and only the teacher and the student see what they're doing, and the teacher can come in and work with the student. So the others in the group don't see that page of that student, but the teacher can see everyone. So I've never used Google Classroom, but she said it really is much more like the classroom situation. So if any of you were interested in that, you might do some research into that or talk to a colleague who's using it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for that. Just before we go to group 2, I was supposed to tell you, if you're the rapporteur, you will need to unmute yourself. Otherwise, it won't let you talk. So maybe we could go on to group 2. You have a different set of questions. So if you could just give us 1 point. So if you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Siobhan from Group 2. We actually didn't designate anybody for this job, so if anyone in my group wants to talk, they're more than welcome. Our question was, who are our students and what kind of lives are they leading? So our students, we had a great group, because our students were basic ESOL students. Many were stay-at-home mums, unemployed, living in direct provision, apprentices, autistic students, students with brain injuries, and students from the travelling community. We also had students in the 18 to 24 age group, early school leavers, and students in diverse groups. So we also discussed what kind of lives they were leading as well. That was part of the question. And some of them were the travelling community, were living the lives of people living in the travelling community. More were living the lives of living in direct provision, living just in a living room. Apprentices are sharing the family home. Other students that my colleagues had are living at home and living a normal family life. And some other person then had some students who have moved from home and they're living by themselves and they're fairly isolated. So that was a question. That's the answer to our question on students and the lives they're leading at present.
There seems to be a lot of diversity there, yeah. But also the thing they all have in common is that they all have some kind of potential difficulty there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, maybe their lives are wonderful, but it sounds like they're lucky if they are. You know, that there's a lot of things that they may have to cope with, whether they're travelers or asylum seekers. Yeah. So that's great. Thanks very much. Maybe we could pass on to group 3 there.
Hi, I'm talking on behalf of Group 3. It's Rian. Our question was, do we miss the classroom? Do we mourn the classroom? Basically, the answer to that would be yes. in the ways that, again, like group 1 mentioned, the body language and the body like the physical contact with people is like, we all of us that were in that group were teaching something different in different levels. So it is kind of difficult to read body language over Zoom. You don't like, it's easier to realize how people are when you are actually physically seeing them or in that situation. So for us, in that sense, it was very important that the students, like we aware of the welfare of the students when they are in the classroom, but in Zoom, it's not necessarily like that.
That's a really good point. Just student welfare, like people's body language is much more obvious in the classroom.
Yes, so like specifically, like I teach professional cookery and barista skills, which is kind of a difficult language or difficult thing to teach over Zoom. So and I teach people that come out of prison and drug rehabilitations and with the Bridge Project in Dublin. So it's much easier when you're actually in a classroom seeing people, what they are doing and how they're reacting and what than sort of like not knowing. And Zoom is like, it's hidden. Like you don't actually see that. It's like a person that's got a front and, like you don't actually get that at all. So you're not sure of the welfare of the student and you're not sure of their mental wellness, So we miss that. Yes, we all agreed that we all miss that.
That's a really important point. Thanks very much for that. Okay, the next group is group 4. So if you can unmute yourself.
I don't know if there's anyone else going to speak. I was one of 3 that was in the group. I think 2 other people left, and unfortunately, one of the group, their connection was quite poor, so we didn't have a proper flow of conversation. As I said, we didn't seem to be able to. We don't know whether we, and that's what I'd like to clarify. Our questions, we didn't know what they were, and we didn't know where to source them. We did try to email and phone the number that we got from me. So as I said to you, we just had a general discussion about what we did. And how we were generally finding the whole remote learning. And again, like everybody's been saying, we miss the lack of contact, we miss the face-to-face, trying to read them, frustrating trying to get on. We had issues personally with our own level of technology skills or technical skills. Second time around was possibly easier than the first time, as in that we would have had created resources for online learning, and we would have had delivered packs to our young people for online learning. So it was just general chit chat, really, about the whole lockdown and remote learning.
I think general chit chat is usually where the best ideas come from. So they say normally it's during the coffee break that good ideas come up. So yeah, great. Thanks very much. Yeah, I think that kind of like the teacher or tutor's own kind of level of resources are really important. And I found that myself. I've done quite a lot of workshops as a TEL champion. They don't become real until you're engaging with your students around it, I think. So, yeah. The second lockdown, I think, everything started to make sense. Would you agree? Yeah. Cool. Okay, maybe we can move along to group 5, if you can unmute yourself.
Hi. We also had similar feelings to other speakers where we missed the human interaction with our students. That was one of the key elements that every student, every tutor said that they missed that human connection where learners do need extra support. Another interesting point we thought was that students also have fewer opportunities to use their English at home now, whereas in the classroom they were speaking in groups or in pairs, and now they have fewer opportunities to use it, so because their native language is spoken at home. And then the other issue was, again, with practical elements of courses. It's very difficult for tutors to teach them on Zoom. And so that was something that tutors mourned in terms of a classroom setting. also those 3 points, this human interaction with your students, the practical element for tutors that are working with those who need that on their course, and also the fewer opportunities for students to actually use the English that they learn in the classroom. So from that's, I think, was most of it. Some students are already preparing to go back to a classroom setting by wearing masks on their Zoom calls because they know it's going to happen. And so they're preparing and doing that. That has been something that other tutors have experienced. So that has been our response to question 1.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. I think, yeah, I find my ESOL students, the ones that progress are the ones who are really engaging socially outside the class. So when there isn't much society there to engage with, it's pretty hard for them. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Brenda. So, and group 6 then. Just coming in. If you can.
Hello, Nick.
Yeah, hi there. David.
Can you hear me? Hi. And I was in a group with Josephine and Helen, so we had a very interesting discussion, and from being teaching ESOL from different parts of the country, and our questions were, number 1, who are our students and what kind of lives are they leading? As it happened, our cohorts are mainly refugees and in the main Syrians who needed lots of supports. Now we'd also have some classes with kind of economic migrants. I suppose with the refugees, and like lots of people are feeling the effects of social isolation at the moment. Now I think regardless of age, one group age range was like 25 to 72. The other group was 19-year-olds. So they'll be coming from completely different places, of course. So in terms then of the second question then is, how can our teaching connect meaningfully with our students' lives? I think, the online has given us an opportunity to connect, and teaching, as we know, is relational. If we hadn't got online, where would we be now in the situation that we find ourselves in the teaching context? But I think what the points we were kind of coming up with there were that it's been an opportunity to facilitate and to be a source of social interaction, and to kind of overcome to overcome barriers, but to overcome kind of isolation or feelings of loneliness that others may have as well.
That's a fantastic point, really, that like it's not just teaching, it's just actually meeting other people and in a sense getting out of your, not say your head, but your little flat or wherever you are. Yeah, I think that was what happened with the classrooms as well, that it was kind of a social event, and it may not seem like much of a social event, but it's what we have, and I think it's still kind of performing that function. Well, yeah, thanks very much, David.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody. It's been kind of really informative talking to people and just hearing. I think there is a lot of mourning, a lot of saying, think of like all the interaction we had with our students. Now we're having to do it online. I suppose, it's what we have, like as the last group says, this is what we have, this is where we are now. We have to make the most of this. And this is where social interaction is at. So I don't know, I think from my point of view, we have to be positive. We have to search for the small things, maybe the kind of small advantages we have now, recognizing what we've lost, but still looking ahead. What can we do well? What can we do best? Or how can we do it a little bit better? So I think that's great. I found it really informative. And I don't know, Fergus, if you want to say anything there.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nick. It was really informative, both from you and the feedback from the tutors. And you can see in the chat box that people are really positive. And just having time now to read out all the questions or comments or tips, everyone can see themselves. I like Sheena Groom's point saying, it's the pre-COVID class I miss, the coffee and the chat and the break also. So that's true as well. That is very true. So we'll have to leave it there because it's after 1:15. So just leaves me to say thanks very much for Nick for putting the work in and preparing a great presentation and taking his time and going through it patiently and slowly and kind of getting you to think and provoking some ideas and thoughts. And yeah, hopefully everyone has picked up a few ideas and maybe might try something a little bit different as a result of what they've heard both from Nick and from the feedback from the group. So thanks very much, and thanks everyone for joining us and for contributing today. I hope you gained something from it. Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.